Welcome everyone. Today we have Nellie returning. How are you, Nellie?
Oh, good. Thanks, Gabby.
So good to have you back. So for those of you that maybe haven't seen Nellie, Nellie is a survivor of a generational family of MK Ultra and SRA, born into a family where she's just suffered horrific abuse, and incredibly, she's regained so many of her memories. And through a series of interviews now, I think we're up to number 6, aren't we? Wow. She's been revealing really what she's been able to recollect about the programming of various ages. And it's just been quite astounding. Like, it's just incredible what you've remembered, Nellie. And we're so grateful for you really breaking down these tools that they've used to mind control a child and create a mind control slave. And I hope that by putting this out publicly, we're really drawing awareness to, what to look out for in our communities. There's so many children that are living through this nightmare at this time. So hopefully with us understanding the way it looks, what these horrific cults get up to, we can step in and, keep an eye on the children around us as well. It's just so heartwarming to see what you're doing for survivors. And I know today we're going to talk about the programming specifically that you went through and have remembered from 13 and 14 years of age, and break down all of that for people. Those years are so formative. Like, it's really for teenagers, a time where they're getting their own identity and experimenting with things they like and dislike. And just hearing your story so far, it's been astonishing just, how much everything was controlled, like from the music that you liked, the colors you liked, the clothes that you wore. So it must have been just such a journey for you to find, your freedom after mind control. And I know that really is something that stands out. When I interview different guests, it's such an ongoing journey for all of us to break all this programming down. And definitely as a society, we're breaking down so much programming that's out there that we've been conditioned with anyway. But with survivors, that we've sort of had this extreme mind control that will be a lifetime to break down. And we've had a lot of viewers asking because they're so amazed at, the way you present so eloquently and are able to go through and explain these different scenes and different traumatic events that have been used to program you as a child and as a teenager. They've just been asking, how have you healed, so much to now be able to speak out and share all this information with survivors. And I'd love you to share a bit about, what you do to prepare for your interviews, because you do such a fantastic job preparing and working out what topics sort of fit and explaining this so that survivors can understand, but also for people that this is quite a new topic as well. So you do such a brilliant job. I would love to hear what you do to focus on healing every day and how you've been able to prepare yourself for speaking out, because it's such a big thing for survivors to find their voice again.
Yeah, it is, Gabby. Like, I can't believe that we're up to session 6.
No.
And it's actually just slightly more than just one statement that I've made out of 54. So there's just so much. I can't talk about everything. I think self-care is a good topic to start with today. But first, I'd like to do a shout out to the whistleblowers, including Kevin Moylan, and say, just so grateful for what you've done. And I know the cost is huge. And for us too, as survivors, we really understand that, we lose family, we lose everything. We have no career. We've never had any kind of career to start with. But the whistleblowers, they expose the worst of humanity as well. And I just wanted to do a shout out, to people like Kevin, because just keep going. You can stand tall, and you've done everything to expose this worst side of humanity. And we're just really so grateful. That's the way we can make systemic change. And even just, I know it's hard hearing these stories for the general public and people that don't have a lot of knowledge about it. And I think the best thing that they can do is just to share the stories as much as they can. These stories need to be heard, however difficult they are. I feel even guilty some days talking about my story because it is so horrific. It's not what people want to hear. People just want to have a nice life, and life is hard as it is without hearing these stories. But it's important to get this out. So important. So I just wanted to say I'm so grateful to you, Kevin, and all the whistleblowers.
That's so beautiful, Nellie. And I think we have to recognize for so many whistleblowers, I think I could say all of them, we're dealing with often PTSD, different health complaints, anxiety, memories coming up, flashbacks, and often ongoing targeting as well. So, you know, for us to stand with our whistleblowers and support them and just do our little bit by sharing this information, you know, with people that are open and ready to hear it, we can all, like you said, raise awareness and create the change that's so needed in our world at this time.
Yeah, so it helps when you make just the tiniest, smallest routines of self-care. I don't even have a lounge suite or anything like that, you know, but I have a hammock, and I feel that that's really integral to my healing. It gives me like a cocoon feeling. It gives me the love that I never had, just taking care of my inner children that were so abused. And just that swinging effect that you get with it. It just, even just moments a day, I try to go in there, and that's definitely a help. So I wanted to speak about that to survivors. Things like that, lying in the grass in nature with trusted friends. And I did that this week. That is hard too, because you're in a public space, and whenever I've been in public spaces, I've been guarded and stalked, and they've always been around me. So I do it in my backyard as well, just lying in the grass, listening to the trees, listening to the wind, and just have those moments of peace. That really helps. The other thing I do is I have to have a lot of superfoods because of the damage that was done internally to me with over 5 decades of drugging, and horrific things put through me. Even cannibal liquid down my tubes, down my nose, into my system, all sorts of things like that were done to me, and that would have a horrific effect on my skin. And just to put the superfoods back in really helps with the adrenal fatigue. I'm always sourcing new ones, making smoothies in the morning, things like that, with lots of superfoods, and that helps me get through, because we just get so exhausted so easily. We've had chronic fatigue all our life that we didn't really know why that was, through being accessed and drugged and controlled like that. So yeah, just the extreme drug cocktails, it's a good counter for that. Definitely.
I love that. And what a beautiful way to show yourself self-care by choosing these beautiful foods and, you know, making fresh juices and having teas and, you know, different drinks that are nourishing your body. And, you know, after a lifetime of such stress and, like you said, all the drugging and the trauma, you know, both that you went through and that you relive through the memories, it's so important to, you know, give our bodies, you know, that beautiful nutrition and, you know, give our bodies the love, like to love ourselves in the way that we never experienced as children. And we've been through so many rituals that are horrific. Like it's so lovely to set up these daily rituals for ourselves of self-care and create something beautiful out of that. So I love that.
Yeah, healing rituals. I mean, it's so hard to get up in the morning. I really struggled with that till quite recently. Having a life purpose finally, to do other things in the community that I'm starting now, working with other people, healing, weaving, running workshops, things like that, that we were never able to have or had controlled ones given to us. Just even getting out of bed in the morning is hard. So it's good to have those rituals that you do, the clean, safe ones. Definitely helps, because we've spent Well, I personally have spent basically 50 years in a war zone, and there's nothing upon exit for us, unlike war veterans. You know, they might have spent 3-5 years in a war. We've witnessed killings for 50 years, 45, 50 years. Therapists are hard to find because no therapist, most of them haven't even witnessed a murder. So how can they have that understanding? So we basically have to do it ourselves, and speaking out on platforms like this does help after we've done all the writing and, you know, the talk therapy. Yeah, it's hard to find a balance. You do have to have a balance between speaking out and private time to nourish your body and nourish your mind and start to create that peace inside. Yeah, it's hard even to know who to trust with the therapy side, because so many of them, and I had that, were infiltrated, had handlers all around them whenever I came and went from places like that. Yeah. Yeah.
It is really,
Basically 50 years of CPTSD, which has a huge effect on your body. So yeah, those little things are really important. You just start with the little things one step at a time, and that can really help.
I love that, Nellie. And just, you know, when you're talking about 50 years in a war zone, wow. And just imagine how normal it would have been for your body to be in just like this flight, fight, just get through a response. Do you know what I mean? Like you knew that it was ongoing, you had to survive it. So your body would just have been running flat out. The adrenals just, you know, pumping, and, you know, these daily routines of self-care and self-love start replenishing and slowing down that racing, so you can come back into balance. And, you know, time in nature is so beneficial as well, just to get those healing frequencies, you know, that natural calm and peace, just to be, rather than to, you know, have to fight or run constantly. So I love that. And it is really a bit of a, like you said, a balancing act between, you know, you want to be able to create because there's so much healing in being able to speak out and create and do things, and that life purpose of being out in the community, helping people and speaking out. And then at the same time, it's just being careful to nourish yourself, to take the time to process, you know, new memories, and, you know, just to even process the healing. Like I know for a lot of survivors, when they come on and speak on our platform, you know, for the first time or about different topics, they'll often go through almost a detox reaction or feel like quite fluey and sick for a few days after speaking out. And they're super proud about what they've done and, you know, feeling really positive, but the body actually has so much to let go of. And, you know, that's all around the silencing and even the programming not to speak out. So you really have to be gentle with yourself and show compassion as you're doing that. And I think you're doing so well to balance that with like little breaks and your self-care routine as well. So we thank you for everything that you're doing, because it's not easy to obviously go through and remember all these traumas, but you have so many people listening and supporting, and, you know, that are so proud of what you're doing for you, for all survivors, and for our community. So thanks, Nellie.
Yeah, so yeah, like you got most of your life you spent just trying to survive even just the drugging that they're putting through you and other things that they're doing, just even surviving that, which also they set up to give you some kind of focus. Like I was always sick. I always had itchy eyes. My nose was closed up most of the time. I had no sense of smell most of the time. And then when I did have some smells, they'd make me feel sick because smells can set you off, and
Triggering.
your body always remembers. Yeah, so all that sort of stuff, just surviving that, let alone all the other horrific things that you enjoy and witness. It's just a survival thing. So now to not be in that survival mode is something so new for us survivors. It's like a new life, and we're starting from scratch. So you've just got to start from scratch and find yourself again after all your identity is taken. Just finding what you like, what music I like, what I like to eat, what time I would like to go to bed.
Yeah.
what time I would like to wake up, not having someone make all those decisions for you. What I want to do with my day, who I want to spend it with. So it's all new. It's it's starting to become a better feeling.
Yay.
Still has its anxieties, but you just have to keep going. Yeah.
One step at a time, right?
Mm-hmm. So here, like I'm talking about age 13 and some of 14, or the end of age 13 and part of age 14. It doesn't sound like a lot, but there was a lot happening with that, with programming. The sexualization was continuing, but more in an awake state, not just in the underground states that they were doing it with me, bringing me out for a period of time. This was now in my kind of like my day-to-day life that they were bringing me more and more out to at this age, end of 13. So I was being brought to the open. I'm also going to be speaking about the certain rewards that we didn't understand back then that were started to be given to us, that some of our alters would recognize. The jewelry, the belief systems that they were continuing with, the ESP, the paranormal stuff that they were trying to indoctrinate us in, who they were using family members to do that with, the witch rituals, things like that that had started when I was, well, I can first remember them at 4. When I was 7, I had to perform some, turning around a certain time, going to the fridge, grabbing an onion, chopping things up, and then the curtain would be open and I'd realize someone had videoed me doing this that was programmed. Things like that after something horrific had just happened, as a way of trying to cope with it. Things like that were happening. The clothes that were chosen for me when I was brought out, with my mother, and handlers would be there to indicate to my mother holding an item, usually red back then, for my mother then to go over and grab that item and buy it for me. So I'll be talking a bit about that. That used to happen. Because clothes were chosen, I was basically told I was a doll. Everything was programmed like I was a doll. The clothes to dress me in, they were showering me, what food I was going to be eating, all that kind of thing. Basically, you're told that you're a doll. And then some of the writing that started, the unconscious and semi-conscious writing that they were starting to get me to do about age 14. So I'm going to be talking a bit about all that today. So basically everything that they did to me, experimented on me, whatever I was a prototype, was their training to do on other people. So I was told at certain times that there was nothing basically that hadn't been done to me, well, not very much. So they were doing everything to me first as an experiment, then to do on others. That's why so much stuff happened to me that I had to get on top of. The uterus hurting and the shocking stuff they would do to our uteruses was happening, and I was forced to be more of a witness to that when I was 14 as well, other people. So we're talking a bit about that today. And that leads into the bigger picture of what they're doing to the world right now, which I'll develop into that later. There's a much bigger picture with the attack on the uteruses. And basically my father used to be really satisfied when he used to do this. He basically, in a psychopathic way, made me into his mother. He used to always say he wished he'd never been born, that I would feel that I wished that I'd never been born as well, things like that. So he'd made me into his mother for more attacks on me, and also training by the rookies and the new ones and the young men and the older men as well with new things that they were doing. basically my father was taking a lot of his rookies, the younger boys, overseas a lot. So he was absent from the house quite often. My mother was set up to say that he'd already gone to his job, which was at a school, but he would be gone for days. So he was taking his rookies over to America a lot to do the serial killings blamed on a lone wolf. Who was also walked through the scene so that the lone wolf would have a memory of being there, sometimes a memory of doing something that they were doing behind him, but make it look like it was him. So this was all a setup, and I was taken to some of those quite early on as well. Some of them had the colour. My father used to say about age 13, when he held my school uniform, "You're going to hate the colour green. We're taking even the colour green off you." And green had a place name in a couple of serial killings that they did. One in Perth had a place name of Green something, and that'll come later, as well as Green River, basically, in America, was a training for their rookies. So I'll be talking about that later on in different sessions. And yeah, these things were always blamed on the lone wolf that they would have as their patsy. And it was just a mass training for their rookies to be indoctrinated into these bigger things, which would lead into more and more different bigger things as they went on. So my father was part of a big cohort back in the 60s when he lived in America for about 6 or 7 years, under the guise of being at Berkeley and playing gridiron and all of that, and it enabled him to go to places from San Francisco and different places before the meeting with my mother was set up. And my mother was under Ewan Cameron as part of that as well. And then it went into the 70s and 80s with the setups of the serial killings that they were doing, and other organisations over there were doing them as well as they would combine their organisations for more manpower, while they were bringing up more and more generations of children to become part of their organisation. So at age 13, my father would set up a lot of nasty surprises for me when I was programmed to go out of the house. Molestations would happen in the neighbourhood, making me feel very unsafe all the time, making me feel stupid. Why did I even go out? Things like that. But I was programmed. Men flashing me, molesting me in schoolyards, happened to my younger brothers as well. They may or may not have memories of that because of the scopolamine. And also the handlers I would see around this age, they were pretending to be carers for people with disabilities and taking them out into the community even way back then. And sometimes they would set a person that they had really tortured and given a lot of drugs and made him quite deranged up my street. They would set him on me to try and chase me and things like that, waving sticks. All these horrific things were happening. So they had control of people in, back then it was called mental wards or whatever, and we lived down the road from a hospital with one of those sections. So that would often happen at times, especially when I was 13, not so much when I was 14, because I'll get into the complete personality change that they gave me age 14 later. When I was 13, they drugged me and shocked me so much, so close to being brought out, that my eyes would really bulge and I'd look a bit mad. When I was going to school, I'd be very aware of that my eyes were bulging, and I had a strange look for people to see, my peers. So they would do that a lot through the electric shocks. And also things were happening where I was programmed to use a tampon for the first time by my mother, and then she'd do something like go and sit with my father, and I was hardly able to walk because she'd showed me how to insert it, but not properly. And then I would walk past the lounge and my father and mother would start laughing at me. So all these kind of things were set up to make me feel stupid and, yeah, just really unsafe in the house and out of the house with these people that were meant to be my parents. There's no words. The wheezing never stopped then. Like, I could hardly breathe. It was a struggle just to stay alive. My eyes were always itchy and watering from the drugging and whatever else they were putting in me, spraying fly spray in my face and all that kind of stuff. My throat was always swollen, so I'd always feel like when I had to bike to school, can I even make it to school? And that was training for me to be very strong, because they were doing horrific things to me to make it very hard to breathe. But I would still have to bike to school and gasp for breath and get that breath in as a training to stay alive with what drugs that they were putting up and up and up in increments through my system. I would have massive foot cramps, headaches all the time back in 13. So it would take my all to stay alive. And then if I ever said anything or even was asked about my day, my mum would start saying things, gaslighting me like, oh, she's got a huge imagination. So that was starting to be said a lot of times, that I had a huge imagination about things as a setup in case I ever spoke out about anything. That was their go-to. And with other relatives and family members as well. Even my twin brother used to parrot that phrase, even when I was older. So that was like a setup, and it was done on purpose. So I think when I was about 13, I was given a watch that my father said had perfect timing, and that it had to have the perfect timing. Very, very important, because of the whole Zodiac organization that they were called back then. And the Zodiac watch was a perfect timed watch. That's why, one of the reasons why they're called the Zodiac, apart from the sky and the souls ascending into the sky. So there was always meticulous timing that they had to do with their drugging. Everything was meted out into perfect, so that it would come through the system, each different drugging through the system in perfect timing. And it was also significant when I was 4 years old, being handed the clock that I spoke about, maybe in session 1, and I dropped it, because when you're shocked a lot, you drop things from the drugging and the shocks. And I felt so scared about that, because they'd programmed me to know that I was on the other side from them. So I would drop the clock, because I was not one of them, even though I was part of it. I was basically the scapegoat, the Judas, all of that kind of thing, the one that they would practice their men on me. One of the forefathers, or the actual forefather, mentioned through my father that basically the big gift had been dropped in his lap of all the knowledge. These are some of the CIA files and that he had a contact with. This is way back at the Black Dahlia time, and all those other murders that they were doing way back then, before they set up the whole Zodiac to come through in the mass media later on, when he'd gathered the Trinity, the 3 men that would surpass him. And basically my father said at one time, 2011, I think, that they had to wait for their God, the main guy, to pass away, because they wanted to do different things than him, but they had to stay with him until he passed away, and then they could do different trajectories, which has made things a lot worse now. And that happened maybe a decade or 2 ago, which enabled them to have more different things that they were doing then to escalate things. And then he said he would go away and think about it, create this big army around him, taking men from other organizations already trained to come into their organization. And that's how it sort of started to escalate back then. So my body would always repeat sensations, like smells and colors would really trigger me way back when I was 13. I remember wanting to get rid of the color blue, which I know why now, out of my life. Up till then, most of my things that I had, which wasn't much, were blue. And I was very aware of that through programming. I was always scared to sleep. My mind would race. My father would come in and say that he was giving me cold sores, herpes on purpose. He would have nothing under his nightshirt when he came in a lot. He'd press himself on me. I basically ended up having no feeling of my body, a big split between my body and my head. Through all the drugging and the shocks and just the dissociation from the sexual assaults. So basically around this time too, my father started putting me in charge of washing all the drugged dishes. So all the dishes like that we ate when I was able to go out and eat with them. My father would always give me the most drugged plate with different drugs in it, or get my mother to deliver it to us from one room, which was separate to another. She wasn't allowed to use the little square hutch that was in the kitchen to the lounge room for me to go and give different plates to people. They used to always come around and give the plates, and we'd be sitting at the table waiting for our drugged food. And my eyes, I remember back then, would change from black, depending on the shocks that I was given, to brown, to hazel, to green. So there was always a lot of colour changes in my eyes that I would notice. When I looked in the mirror, I was only able to look at my eyes, or sometimes I would really avoid them and just do things without looking. There was a big thing with mirrors to avoid mostly. But sometimes I'd notice. And then my father would make, much later, he'd make comments like, light up, light up, light up, illuminate, illuminati, light up. And that's where the glow thing came from, because you're lit up like from the shocks.
Wow.
Making a mockery of that.
Wow, that's really interesting about the changes in your eye color as well. I hear that a lot from survivors, and even you can see them in different photos during their childhood, etc. And just to explain for people that maybe haven't seen the previous interview, the blue color with your programming, that was related to the Delta program, right? So the assassin killer
and the red was the beta. So there are two colors I still avoid even to this day.
And they're everywhere too, blue and red, right? Like politics, entertainment,
red or blue.
Dominant.
Yeah, that's right. And then like with the shocks, they were very meticulous with that as well. They were always adjusting the watts or ohms or whatever on all the different dials. I cannot look at a shock machine ever. Could not even be in a room with one, because they give you the big, when you stood next to them, just the feeling that you get before you've even been begun with it is just a horrendous. There's no words for the pain that is, and to feel your head actually on the ceiling and looking down at a body way below you, like it completely dissociates you when they use the huge amounts of watts that they will use sometimes on you. Not just the minute or the small or the medium, but the whacked out ones that are just horrific. And these dials would always be set to different wattages or ohms or whatever they're called. I don't even want to look at the dials or even know what they are called. But each one of them, each different setting would be a different altar as well. different parts of the brain. So that's how they work them with the different drugging as well. They're well studied in that. So back to 13, back then I was pretty isolated from people. They didn't have me with a lot of friends. That would change at 14 completely, like one thing to another. So back in age 13, sometimes I'd be programmed to meet some person, some girl about my age out in the schoolyard behind us. And she would invite me to her house and I'd walk in and there would be sitting the programmers with her family, grinning at me. And I would just, sometimes I would run from the house. Sometimes I wouldn't be able to. So they were even programming me in other houses in the neighborhood. The men in suits, big men, black suits, big faces, terrifying men.
You must have just been feeling like, what is next? You know what I mean? It's like you couldn't go anywhere, even to another house, to get away from your own family, and they're still there.
Mm-hmm.
That ongoing
Not even what is next, because each time you're wiped into another one and another one and another one, you're not necessarily, you don't have that whole string of memories where you can go, hey, this is yeah, let's just try. And you couldn't even get out because the handlers surround you. I was completely guarded. My father said to me once, we spent millions on you, not in your $1 million currency, but in ours, in manpower, guarded around, programmed, guarded around the clock, the Zodiac again, programmed completely all the time. Like the manpower that they used on me was
incredible.
exorbitant. It was huge. So it was like my father around that age used to get me to watch the $1 Million Man and then the Bionic Woman back then, and he'd make comments like, we're making you into that.
Wow.
Things like that. And we wouldn't understand. I was only about 7 or 8 back then, maybe 9, when would be taken to other people's houses to watch these things as well. And who knows if these other family people even knew my father. They were all under scopolamine, under the pretext of being his work buddies at the different school teachers, all of that. Who knows if they even remember us acting normal. Well, not quite normal, but as normal as I was used to. Back then, that was my normal. But yeah, those sort of things would be said as well. He'd also give me books back then when I was about 7, of war stories. And one in particular was a person that was captured by Japanese people and had needles in the eye to change the eye color. So these were the books that my father was giving me when I was only 7 and saying, we're going to do that to you. We're changing your eye color. And with the needles and things later that I'll talk about when I get to age 21 in the eye and things like that. It's quite disgusting.
It's interesting how, your father was, linking it, what they do to those types of movies, which are really, about combining the human being with technology, with creating robots, just to hear that this whole transhumanistic agenda was really going on, and the experiments were going on with generational children way back then when you were a child. And that's really what we're living through right now, is that agenda continuing to roll out.
And I was even programmed to watch the Poseidon experiment, or a movie of some name like that, in which a person was shrunk into a little size and then went through somebody's eye. And then my father would be sitting in the lounge room laughing and staring at me like something like that was going to happen to me, like scary stuff to do with the eyes. That's why my eyes actually are tattooed black, which I'll get to later. I was programmed to have my eyes tattooed black, top and bottom, in order for them to say to me, we've tattooed the eyes that me as the witness. So they gave me a tattoo to memorialize me as the witness, my eyes watching what they were doing. Wow. Everything had meaning. It was just bizarre stuff.
Unreal. And do you by tattooing your eyes, do you mean like the eyelid, the top and the bottom, like
Top and the bottom.
which is quite we see a lot of that symbology in the Egyptian symbology with the eye, with the big lines. Do you know what I mean? Like the Ra and all of those old gods. Wow.
Yes.
And it's that constant reminder, isn't it? That
it's a constant reminder. I would like to have them removed one day. That would be very painful too. It was extreme pain when I had it done, and there was a handler in the studio as well and they had the woman programmed to use tattoo that wouldn't budge. So the person that I went with that lured me there, hers washed off within months, whereas mine is still hasn't budged because they used the most extreme tattooing formula on me. It hasn't budged in 28 years, still the same. It's still black. It's a marking. Yeah. So I remember going to a skating rink because I've been given skates for a reward for something that I didn't even want. It was horrendous. And even handlers would come in there, men in black suits, when I was going to the skating rink for one-on-one tuition with someone that I was allowed to go to, and there's a handler, and I would notice these people, like this woman would look at the handler who looked out of place, wearing a black suit and formal black boots in there, and then she'd look again, and then he'd be exiting out the door very slowly, giving me a stare the whole time, which would make me crawl inside and keep me in alter, and then basically exit, and then she would say nothing like it, and I wouldn't understand. Then I would just feel a huge anxiety again. So I was always kept in this anxiety state. Another state that they would put me into is from all the drugging that they were doing when I was in bed, that would continue on into day-to-day life at school sometimes, where I would feel paralyzed and that my body was being poured with concrete and I couldn't move. And I used to call it my concrete feeling. And that's from when you're lying in bed and they're doing things to you and you can't move. You just get this sensation in your body that your body's been slowly filled with concrete, and it's horrendous, and it affects your mind as well. So I would constantly have these flashes when I was out and about at school and trying to stay focused and learn and talk normally to people, because it was always drilled into me that I had to present as normal. And they would make it very hard with all the different drugging and the shocks and everything. And with the eye bulge back then when I was 13, I would be very conscious of that I looked a bit mad and crazed and needed to hide that from people. So I would keep my eyes down a lot. And then that would make me look like I was a shy person. So everything had meaning. I can remember my father programming me to pluck my eyebrows so thin, take all the hair out, then pluck a hole, like I have a hole about here. And then I remember having a drive with them, the family, and he had situated me in the same seat that I was in when I used to be brought back when I was very young from electric shocks from Lake Alice. And he'd be looking in the rear vision mirror again, which I used to remember his eyes would be so hateful, and he'd tell us to shut up when I was trying to hold my little brother's hand after horrific shocks. And he'd be screaming and yelling at me suddenly in the car with the same rear vision mirror look, that I had done this to my eyes and that I was disgusting when I was still programmed to do it. So it's like the Nazi thing. You're programmed to do something and then you're punished and made to feel like you had done it. And that's further cementing that you had done this to yourself. So they're creating that split between what they do to you and then making you feel bad for doing it yourself because you don't have the memory that they had got you to do this. So more and more of those splits were being created in everything. So many little things. I can't even begin to start talking about just how many. And I guess everything was set up. Even At age 13, I remember my father came into school to make sure that I was to take typing, which would be programmed for me to use much later in my life. I had to learn typing skills very early at school, through school. Clothing, they had a big thing about women being stupid and sewing a button on and all that kind of thing. And so I had to take a clothing class, which they programmed me to make a big cushion, which was later my bed when I left the house. I didn't have anything, so I used to sleep on a cushion when I left the house when I was about 16. So everything had a forecast for later. And even when I was typing, my broken pinky used to give me a lot of anxiety because that was broken at a horrific event that I spoke about when I was 9. And I remember I used to look at my pinky a lot when I was typing, and it had not much. It still doesn't. It's still pretty much useless, and I wouldn't be able to use that finger a lot on the key, but I would have to, so it would further hurt it. So all these things were created to bring back all these triggers and things that you feel in your body that you couldn't quite reach.
Yeah, and I guess that's the ultimate, type of handling is obviously there's handlers are there setting up these splits and negative feelings through traumas and abuse. But if they can make a survivor, or at that stage a child, feel so worthless and so hopeless and so bad about themselves, it's like you're actually starting to handle yourself through the programming that they've put into you. When you see your finger and it's not working, or you can't do this at school, or you're not smart enough, you can't concentrate because of what you're going through at night. It's that constant reinforcement in your life of just you're not good enough, isn't it? And that's such a massive program for survivors to break down and break through.
That's so true, yeah. And you have to do this for the rest of your life. They set up so many things like that. It's always been reinforced and reinforced throughout your entire life, until they let you go or kill you. Yeah. So, yeah. And also they started me around 13 writing letters. So through programming, I would write these letters to people, pen pals, whatever. And that was also starting to program me to have certain memories overnight that would come into the day, and I'd write these letters. So that was starting back then as well. And then end of age 13, my mother started to take me out on some outings, just to the supermarket. There'd be handlers everywhere. She was letting us know that everything was controlled by my father. She was only given enough money to get what she had to get to the cent. And sometimes she was made to feel stupid because she'd write a couple of extra things on the list, and then there'd be this big thing with a whole queue behind us of her having to put things back. So they were really programming us into a lot of poverty as a programming as well. And that would make me feel embarrassed about her, all those sort of things. And people would be sighing, and she'd be saying, put this back, put that back. The handlers would be leering around us. That was always happening. She started to complain to my father, programmed to, that I had no clothes to wear. So this was starting to make me feel, oh, wow, she's siding with me for once. And this was a program for later things that would happen for me to start gaining some kind of trust with her when I'd never had any of that before. She was always just robotic around me, completely dissociated, not a mother at all. And so this was trying to build some kind of trust, which would come into more negative things that I'm going to talk about later. So once she took me to a place that was open late at night, and my father had said no for a couple of nights in a row, that she wasn't allowed to take me to go and find some clothes. And this would happen a few more times after this. Finally, it was all set up. So there was a handler there when we arrived, and he would be standing by the rack of clothes. We'd be on the other side. I'd be trying to get away from him, move to the other side of the room that we were in, the shop. My mother would be making eye contact with him. Eventually, he would stand back, put the clothing item back, and she would go over, pick that out, and of course it was red, and it was like a pair of tartan trousers or something, and she would choose that for me. So even then, I wasn't allowed to have my own choice of clothing. I was allowed to through her. And then she would have done her job right. Another thing that they got me to have was a white pair of moccasins. So they were still doing the Pocahontas thing with me, which was my journey towards further rapes and things, but these were more out in the open, and then the trafficking and the brothels. So all this kind of stuff was set up.
There's so many ties between programming and, you know, what we see in modern pop culture, like the Disney cartoons, like you mentioned, Pocahontas then. And just imagine, you know, for generational children like yourself that are having this program put in through deliberate acts, you know, like the moccasins, etc. Then you're also receiving this, you know, additional programming through watching these very, very popular cartoons and entertainment that's out there. It's just so multi-layered, isn't it?
And back then too, when I was about 7, it was Wizard of Oz. We were all on our way to see the Wizard of Oz because of me, because I was in that group with the nun that was taking us. And because my handler, Stephen, was at that school that we were heading to watch it with, that school around the corner from our school, a handler suddenly came hurtling towards us, making eye contact with me in a very menacing way, and then went up to the nun behind me and said to turn around, that some excuse why it wasn't going on. And then later it was said to me by Leek's imposter and speaking to my father that it didn't happen because they didn't want me to be in the same room as Stephen then at a different school and know that he was at that school and be maybe triggered. So we were sent away from that. But I was made to watch that under programming and all those other movies that they got us to watch.
Yeah,
But this was one that was meant to be in the open.
Yeah, Wizard of Oz is such a common program in Survivors, and it was interesting,
especially back then.
Yeah. And
in future generations, they started with, and I'll get to that later, Thomas the Tank Engine with the Fat Controller, which was the programmer. And that was set up. And also the train would go round and round and round, and the kid would be just watching the train go round and round and round. And that was a cover for there was something really wrong with that child that was just sitting there like that. And so all these and all the connotations of the trains and what they were doing, and that was another big setup as well, as children being put on train tracks and only allowed up when the train was almost about to run them over. And I was forced to watch things like that with young children, which was absolutely horrific, with handlers all around them. There's no words.
And they can
I'll come to that later.
Yeah, they continue to just use these symbols in pop culture to really trigger survivors. And an interesting one with Wizard of Oz, because obviously one of the big symbols is the yellow brick road. The horrific, shit show that was a coronation over the weekend, they actually used the yellow grounds for them to walk.
No way.
Yeah. And I was just like, as if that's not going to be triggering and engaging so many survivors programming because of the Wizard of Oz. And they're just walking along this yellow ground. Like, who's ever seen a yellow ground in a do you know what I mean? It's normally checkerboard or so I thought that was really interesting that they put that yellow ground out to the public so much at this time, obviously trying to activate different programming out there. So beware.
When I was 7, they had white stones at a ritual all around the ritual table that I was forced to walk on before the horrific event happened with the young boy who was brought over from America that I spoke about in earlier sessions. And then I was programmed to have that name, White Stone, much later in my life. So all these connotations that they use on purpose. Yeah. So my twin brother started when we were a lot younger, in the second town that I lived in next to Lake Alice, near Lake Alice. he started with this nonsensical language. So he was trained to do this, and it was made to look as a cover that it was fun, but he'd make these weird noises and utterances, eventually leading to slightly racist remarks, cryptics. So he was basically trained to begin teaching me the way that they will talk about a murder, or even schedule one based on some kind of nonsense. So it was like a nonsensical world where nothing makes sense. Stupid names, connotations of names. So that was like training me into some kind of understanding, I guess, of how they would make these events, and because they make a mockery of everything. So that began to happen more and more. And that was a way of me thinking, yeah, we're getting along with my brother from time to time, because I didn't see him very often. We're always put into separate rooms. He was only coming into my room. I wasn't never able to go into his, unless I was programmed to, or he invited me for a reason. He was always just the messenger for me, which is really cruel. You think you're having a relationship with your brother. He'd come in and switch on the radio suddenly and say there's a song, and then I'd be having mesmerizing drugs through me, and I'd eventually not like the song at first. Then the second time I heard it, I'd like it. So they were programming me to have my music taste through him, to start with, even though it was them, the programmers, programming him to do it. So this is the ripple effect, so that you're never aware that this is happening, for your music tastes and things like that, and eventually clothing tastes that were programmed. But you're given mesmerizing drugs so that you eventually like them, I guess, through this mesmerization. I do this with people too, which I'll get to much later on. They will mesmerize you with people, and these people will be mesmerized by you as well. And there comes some kind of relationship. So often these things would happen when I was just brought from a horror or a trafficked event, where I'd be really shaking. And this would sort of calm me down a little bit too. Like I'd have sometimes a lump in my throat, and then I'd start laughing, not even knowing why I was laughing at him, because it just didn't make sense. But then I was drugged to actually start laughing, with whatever drugs they are. And yeah, sometimes we'd be bouncing off the walls from the drugs that they gave us. Into my later time around these handlers, where they would have just killed somebody or about to kill them, and they would be mocking them and things like that, and saying certain connotation words, and it's
It's like everything's just inverted, isn't it? So all of the values are just reversed. And interesting how you said about them creating like this nonsensical world around you with these words. It's like they're creating, and they live in almost like an alternate reality around us. They've got their overlay of what they do over, you know, what is organic life, and just controlling through that way so much through different words being used, etc. It's just
that's right. And so now I'm getting to about age 14, where things changed a lot. Like it was a complete turnaround in personality, front personality for me, that they programmed me to have. First of all, around my birthday, I was made a Milo by my father. I had a denim skirt on that my father had told me to go and put on. And he suggested that I walk up to the shops, which was maybe a 10-15 minute walk from where we were. It might have been a Sunday. I think it was, because the shops were shut. And on my way up the road, just around the corner, my legs started to give way from the drugging. I just about went down, and right at that moment, all timed, there's my father opening the front passenger door. Get in, get in, get in, repeat 3 times. Get in, and collapse into the car, driven away. Within seconds, I'm out to it. And then I remember, I don't know how many hours or days later, woken up, been punched, could have been a week later, could have been, who knows. I'm still being punched repeatedly. The handlers are all around me, some young, a lot were my father's cohort around his age. JP Pisani's imposter was one of them. There was a Navy man that I'd met first when he was about 15, when I was about 9, and I was put in the crane to be dropped into the ocean. He was there. He was particularly vile to me. They were calling me whore, prostitute. This is all part of my training. Spat in my face, repeatedly punched with the words coming at you as well. Sat on a stool, obviously shocked because the whole body is just dropped, like stomachs, everything. There's no muscles, and you're having to do your best to stay up and have the punches. Went on for hours. And then I'm woken up and I'm in my father's car, which was silver at that time. They usually only use blue, white, silver cars because they blend in more. And the men are there, the Navy man's next to me, Pisani's imposters in the front, turning around, leering at me, sneering. My father's there driving, another man's there in the back seat with me, and I'm in the corner trying to get away from them, and they're telling me that I have to get out and walk. And I'm like, but where am I going? And they're mocking that. They're saying, calling me stupid. She doesn't even know how to walk. She doesn't even know where she's going. How stupid is she? F word, all that kind of stuff. The bad sneers. And then I'm being yelled, walk, walk, by these men, including my father. And they open the door because you don't have much energy, and my legs are like lead, and I'm having to walk up the road. I'm in those white moccasins again, and walking towards the city centre, and I didn't even know what I was doing, just knew that I had to walk. As I got to the shops, 2 boys that were maybe my age, new ones on bicycles, could hear the bikes coming and they're talking, molested me on the way past, grabbed me in a sexual way, and I just felt terrible. And they kept going, and they were on their brand new bikes because they get rewarded like that. And next thing, a blue car is going slowly past me with a video. Back then, they were quite large video cameras poking out the window, videoing everything. And I remember keeping on walking and thinking, don't look at the video camera. Went around the corner. By then, you've forgotten about the video camera. And then I went down another wave that I was programmed to go, because they have you up under scopolamine, doing this so that you sort of know your way, but you don't know how. And I'm thinking, how am I going to make it home? And then I see the big flashing lights of this massage parlor. I think there was only one massage parlor back then, and that was where they used to take me out the back, Christmas Eve when I was much younger, up till then. And I remember, don't look at it. And then right when I was about to collapse again, there's the car with the men, and they got me in the car and must have driven me home. I have no memory, or wherever they took me. So these things would happen quite often. It was really huge. So they wanted me to see that massage parlor in my awake state, because that's where I was first trafficked in another year or 2, while still a child. That was just before I started school in my 14th year. My birthday was always just before the school started. They put me in the highest achieving class. So I've gone from the lowest achieving with all the kids that were naughty to now being in the highest achieving class. And I'm programmed after hours by the programmers to know the whole, like, this is an organization that has the whole curriculum. They have it. They know, and they even run what are the questions going to be in the whole curriculum. This is in New Zealand. So I know all the answers to everything. They've given me a completely different front personality after this. been programmed. The class clown. I'm popular. People are mesmerized by me. I have lots of friends.
Wow,
This is to set me up for later days, being taken more out into the community, nightclubs, things like that would happen when I was still 14, 15. It's all a big setup. I'm being given preferential treatment by teachers. There's mesmerizing drugs reciprocal with me and teachers. They're developing me into a kind of Lolita personality, quite coy, precocious. Get a lot of laughs from that, from people. All programming before I go to school on these days. Basically, I'm highly, highly intelligent. I'm flying through all my classwork. I'm getting bored, so I'm acting like the class clown. I'm more mesmerized around my father too, liking him because of the mesmerizing drugs that they're giving me towards him. And he's been nice to me this year because he knows it's a huge setup and what he's going to put me in. This is my year at the top. So they give you a year at the top where they're preparing a whole lot of stuff underneath you, which is horrific. Boys are mesmerized by me. I'm getting a lot of unwanted attention. Behind the scenes, they're doing laser and creams on my skin. My skin is perfect. They've given me a kind of sultry look. They make you mimic them in mirrors so they can make you mirror the sneer that they give you, so that then you've got your frozen face on. I'd even be said to by my handler Stephen, put that face on, and he'd sneer at me and I'd have to copy that, and then that's what the poor victims would see. I wouldn't know that my face was frozen like that, but they would see me as one of them when I was taken to events sometimes. I wouldn't just be looking like I was terrified. I would have a frozen sneer on. When I was 14, it was like a sultry look, the bottom lip, the top lip, all that kind of stuff. Even at school photos, it was the handlers coming in doing the school photos, and they would trigger me to pull that face so that I would look like the most precocious one in the classroom and the class photo. I'd be sitting automatically when they give you a look, your part of your body, hip would shoot out. You'd instantly go into mode. So this is like the whole Lolita sexualization that they will do to you.
This is really part of like the beta programming, giving you a beta kind of personality to interact in those situations. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. And they also developed more and more of my writing then, which was going to be my later job. So all this, and this is what they did to the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski. He was a patsy, so they programmed him to do all that massive writing, and then he was blamed for everything. They had him in a cabin in the woods, making him look like a lone wolf. Apart from, I'll get to that later. But this is all what they would do, and they were doing this to me as well. So everything I was writing, stories, scripts, when I was 14, I think I wrote one about the Munsters, wrote a script that my teacher loved, wanted to develop it into a play. All that kind of stuff was being done as well. I was also moved into the big double room that my brothers used to have for some kind of reward after some horrific event, where I was always shaking and trembling after this. My father made a big thing of moving me into this big double room that had blue wallpaper, and I was allowed to strip the wallpaper and connect with my mother, who was allowed to do it with me. One of the first things she was allowed to do with me, strip all the wallpaper off, which was blue, which I hated, and change it into what I was programmed to have was pink and white stripes and pink and green flowers. And this is kind of like a fertility thing, like pink and green, a girly theme. All that kind of stuff was done. And during this time, my mother started coming in, programmed to talk about ESP with me more, paranormal stuff. saying stupid things that I was at first in disbelief about, black cats crossing your path. And she told me a story about that and how she believed in that she wouldn't walk under a ladder, belief in ghosts, all that kind of thing as a way to connect with me. And eventually I started nodding and we'd have conversations about it. And she was talking about knowing when things would happen. And of course, that was happening to me because of my programming. I would always know when someone was coming towards me, a normal person, if I was out, if they were going to stop and talk to me. And I would even say to friends, that person way in the distance, which would be 200 meters away, is about to stop and talk to me. And that person would. So I would always have that programming as well in ESP. But yet my father was still coming into the room sometimes late at night, and he'd push my whole lips back in an ugly way and say, "You're still ugly. We've fixed your teeth," because my teeth were really wobbly after that event when I was about 9. I'm being pulled, and I'd had braces when I was 12, 13. I was still ugly, even though that he'd fixed my teeth. So that was still the balance being done. So you're brought up and you're still put down as well, to be still under their control and know that they can do anything to you. He'd still spit in my face, call me ugly, call me a whore. So all that kind of trafficking stuff was being brought more out into the open later. So that was still being done. So basically I was told that I was an ATM machine, an automatic teller machine, like teller was the word, to be writing and telling the story about them, which was a horrific thing to be put on me. But I didn't understand it back then, that they would have done too much and they couldn't be stopped by the time this happened.
Yeah.
And because of their psychopathy, and their delusions of grandeur, that want to be known. And this is the thing that us survivors battle. You know, it's our intent to get it out there, and we have to. And hopefully something will be done to stop them. Yeah, but it's hard. Yeah.
They obviously feel so untouchable, so powerful that they don't mind their story going out, that they want to almost brag about it, right? Like, we can do this and get away with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my father was coming into my bed at night and he was training me to write what was just in my mind before he woke me up. So he was making that time shorter and shorter so that I would be programmed to have all these thoughts in my head from them. And then he would suddenly wake me up and I would have to quickly write them all down. And it was all crazy stuff that didn't make sense. And then after a while, and he'd tell me to go and hide them in the wardrobe or under the bed. I remember once, months later, looking for them and they were all gone. So he'd taken them as evidence that, yes, it's working. This type of programming is working. Here's the evidence that she's doing. So she can now go from being programmed to actually writing down word for word what we've programmed in a sequence in her mind, or the crazy, crazy stuff, which is what they were doing to like Ted Kaczynski and all those sort of people that write suicide notes and things like that in their own handwriting. They can be programmed to do that quite easily.
So these thoughts are all, and ideas are really just being implanted during programming and then coming out, and even the people are thinking, oh, this is me. It's just incredible.
Yeah. So I had lots of close friends put around me at this time, and they were also used as lures to take me to different places and set up for further events to happen. One of them was being lured to a organization group called Antioch. It was a Christian group through the church or something that was run in halls or near a church. And Stephen happened to be there running the group, of course. So he was there. And this was a way for me to start meeting other boys that they were putting me with. Like 2 of them that I was put with when I was 14 were captains of the first 15 of my school. And this also triggered me because of the boy that was made a paraplegic, and they would say things to me like, if you don't go with this boy, what happened to that boy who was also a captain of the 15 will happen to you, will do this to you. So these sort of things were said behind the scenes to make their advances to you. You would eventually start going out with them. It was called back then. My mother would also take me to people's shops that had like the boys started to get older and older. A 17-year-old, I was only 14, and she would embarrass me. Like, we'd get out of the car on a pretext of having mother-daughter time. By then she'd built some trust in me, so I was looking forward to some mother-daughter time. Let's go and get an ice cream. And then, to my shock and horror, when we arrived, there's one of the handlers right there, looking at her, looking at me, giving us the stare, the glare, the sneer. Gone into the shop that the current first 15 captain's father owns. It's an ice cream shop, happens to be. Getting the ice cream, and she's really flirting with them. And then not only that, making reference to me, maybe we'd like to have a date kind of thing. And I'm just horrified, embarrassed, and just betrayed.
Yeah.
So betrayed. This is meant to be mother time, my first time in my life with her, because she was never allowed to give me any attention before. And this is what she's doing. So this kind of thing started to happen. And then, of course, the boy, the first 15 captain, comes up to me at school when I'm with my friends, wants to sit with us. I'm feeling really awkward, doesn't feel good. And then he's asking me, can we go and sit alone? And I know that I have to. And then we're talking. Then I'm mesmerized. He's got mesmerizing drugs in him. And we're just talking. So that's a way that they were starting to get me to get used to being with older people, older men, which would happen more and more as they brought me out into brothels. Yeah. Complete betrayal by my mother, but it wasn't her fault. She was programmed to do that. She may have no memory of it too. She had so many alters.
So very sad, isn't it? Would have just been so, desperate for that mother-daughter bonds and some quality time, and just to see, that finally the attention that you get is just, it's not the attention that you want or need at all.
No. So we started to keep going on family holidays. One of them was in an airplane. Now, my father had always said up to this point that he would never get in an airplane. This was his cover, because he was all the time. He was, flying over to different parts of the world to train as rookies. So we were taking an airplane to Wellington, which was a close by city. It's the capital city of New Zealand. And it's our first big family holiday all on a plane. He has no trouble on the plane, and I'm thinking, and even my mother mentioned, but you said that you would never get on a plane, which was a red herring. Of course he was getting on planes, but he wanted everyone to think that up to that point he couldn't fly. He had a huge fear of it or whatever, just in case someone said that he was flying places or whatever, that was a cover. So this is a millionaire family that we're going to stay with, friends of his. Who knows if they even were or even remember us there? I don't think so. These were all set up people, the poor people. So they own a huge chain of smaller grocery stores, kind of like your IGA that you have. So they're very, very wealthy. They love to attack the wealthy. They have 2 children. One is around my age, she's a boy, and one's about 10, she's a girl. So this is a setup for my father to train his rookies too, who are all around the house, outside the house, training them how to do this kind of thing. So we've arrived, we've got a taxi. Taxi, of course, is one of the handlers, one of the organisation men. My father knows him, but pretending that he's a taxi man. We've gone to this family's, one of their stores, And my father's got out and said that he's going in for us to come in as well while the taxi's waiting. My mum is arguing with him, got the taxi waiting. What do you need? We don't need anything. He's saying, yes, you always have to take something with you. And he's bought a tin of Milo. Now, what they were doing was they were getting into the manufacturers and they were drugging whole things to be put into, en masse, to be put into chain stores, grocery stores. So this is the Milo that's been done by Nestle.
Do you think this was with scopolamine as well?
Oh, everything, yeah, whatever their cocktails are all mixed through, en masse, manufactured. So this is for my benefit to see. He's just grabbed one off the big stand of Milo, and they had them like in a big pyramid. Like this was a big event for me to see what they're doing. We've got back in the taxi, we've arrived. My father's got straight to work in the kitchen with the mother of the family. Big pots of whatever was being made. I think it was spaghetti bolognese. He's getting stuff out of his pocket, and just in front of me, he stood me there to watch, adding stuff to the spaghetti bolognese. She's just about caught him, seen him do something, and then it's just wiped. I've seen her completely dissociate, or the drugs have wiped her. And he's sneering at me and laughing, and I'm standing there thinking there's something so wrong happening. Something huge is going to happen. And then I'm standing there, and then I'm feeling like, why am I just standing here now? And my father said, go and play, go, and there's a massive games room. Like, they had everything, this family. They had a huge games room. We'd never seen anything like it. And then the food is suddenly being served without the father arriving. So he was obviously handled somewhere else, being brought back into the house later. My father has his own little bowl of food ready, so separate from ours. He's already done his food. Everything's dished up. By then, I've forgotten all that happened in the kitchen. We've eaten the food. The father's arrived halfway through. My father's dished out his bowl for him with a big smile. And then all of a sudden, we're given maybe 10 minutes. I've met the young girl. She's about 10. She's maybe 3 years younger than me. My father suddenly packed us all off to bed really, really early. My brothers were complaining. Younger brothers were crying because I'd seen the games room. My father's got really nasty and he's hissed, get to bed, something like that. And he's going to make us another Milo. Mine came separate. So my 3 brothers got same Milo and mine was different. We've all been put into our sleeping bags. My 2 younger brothers had blue sleeping bags. I had a red one, of course, and my twin brother had a green one for whatever reason. I don't know. Put in our sleeping bags. I can hear them snoring straight away. All 3 brothers went straight to sleep, struggling to go to sleep, about to go to sleep, and there's my father. And he's like, you're awake, stay awake. I want you to listen to this. I want you to listen. Listen, keep your eyes open, because I want you to stay awake for this. And I could hear his footsteps, and I hadn't really known the layout of the house, but I kind of assumed that there were bedrooms up in that direction, away from the kitchen, and we're to the left of the kitchen. And I can hear screams from the girl. I'm telling him to go away. He's yelling out to her, no one can hear you. Hear your parents snoring. I could hear all the snoring. I don't know whether it was them snoring. It was really loud. It could have even been, because what they'll do is they'll record something and play it back on a device, often with things like if they're waking a witness up to hear screaming, they will have a pre-recorded scream played at certain events that the witness will go, no, I heard screaming at this time. Whereas things can be done much earlier or much later or whatever. So I can hear her screaming, and he's attacking her uterus with the coat hanger. It was horrendous. And all I could do was listen. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, couldn't get up. I wanted to get up and try and be there for her. Wouldn't have been able to help her out or help her up or anything, but I just had to lie there and listen. And then the next morning, I must have gone to sleep, passed out. My mother's up saying that, why did we all just go to sleep so early? We didn't do anything. She wanted to get the girls together, all of us, her and the mother and the girl and me, to go out. And the mother's saying, no, but she's woken up and she's really not in a good way. She's hysterical. And the poor girl's come out, she's screaming, she's in agony, and the mother's taken her back to the room. And then she's come out apologizing to us. That she might be putting it on, but she's worried about her. She hasn't acted like this before. She's suddenly got her period from the blood, and it's not. So
it's so traumatic for you as well, knowing what this girl.
Yeah, because I knew what it felt like. I'd had that done to me many times, so I know how it feels. It's horrendous. Just the psychological thing as well. Then all of a sudden, my father's come out of the toilet or wherever he was hiding, packed everybody up. We hadn't even unpacked anything, so we're out to the car. The father of the family is saying, oh, I want to show you some sights. Such a quick visit. You haven't even seen any sights. We haven't even done anything. So he's driving the car, the father. We're all packed in. There's 4 of us in the back seat, 5 of us, my mother and my 3 brothers and me, all packed into because it doesn't matter, because there's a convoy of people around us everywhere we go, that if any police saw us all packed in like that and pulled us over, the convoy would do something to distract them.
They're not worried about road rules,
or whatever. We've eventually got to the airport and left. So that was another family holiday. And these were frequent. Yeah. Another one was Tongariro, Mount Tongariro and Mount Ruapehu. My father suddenly announced, as he did last minute, we're going on another family holiday. We had 10 minutes to pack, kind of thing. It's always rushed. We're just woken up to this. Taking us on a beautiful mountain holiday. We're going to do some mountain walking. We've arrived. It's like a ghost town. Everyone there is already under. And back at that last house, that was to be set up when we left. That didn't end for them there. My father's handlers that he was training, another generation, were put inside that house to keep things going now that they were all under. He was just showing them how it's done. So now we're taken to a mountain resort, like a tourist resort. My father's been caught by my mother standing, smoking a cigarette and watching one of the rooms, all different kind of little huts everywhere. There's no children to be seen. There's no adults. There's only handlers. A couple of them I saw that gave me a sneer, feeling really strange. My mum's asking my father what he's doing, that he appears to be watching and stalking, but she's still programmed to say that that's for my benefit. And then he's told us to get back to the rooms that we were staying in. He's come in, he's made us food and drink. We just passed out for days, woken us up while they're doing things to other people there. Woken me up and said, oh, there's something for you to hear. And then I was allowed to come out for a bit with my father, and there's a car with one of my father's school teacher mates with a woman in the front who didn't seem to have a lot of muscle tone or anything. When the car stopped, she just lurched. So she's very much under. And the guy, the school teacher friend of my father, has yelled out, 3 Swedish blondes, fridge is done, easy access, it's all ready to go, basically. And my father, it's all programmed. And my father said, don't talk like that around her, which I was meant to hear it anyway. This was all programmed. And then eventually he drove away, and then my father took us later up after we kept waking up and going to sleep through the drugs. my mother asking, why are we not doing the walk? And my father was saying, it's not ready, the weather's not right yet, which it was just a cover. And then we went on a walk, just me and my two younger brothers, me and my twin and my younger brother, not the youngest one. He stayed home with my mum. Our legs are feeling like lead. So this is another way of training me, especially, to walk huge terrains while drugged. And some of the cliffs that we went through that my father was getting me through and my two brothers were only about this narrow with a huge drop down. So this is really high training for me to be doing these walks under so much drugging. Legs feel like lead. Eventually, they didn't. I was under performance enhancing drugs at certain times, to be leaping across things when there's massive drops. And he took us all the way up to see a huge lookout where you could see, pointed out it was Blue Lake, and then there was Green Lake, and apparently they were significant. I still don't know why, but they were beautiful colour. And then we went back and went home. So I don't know what happened to these families, but we saw three men, and my father kept saying, they're German, and they were nudists. So they were bathing in some hot springs on our way out of there in the nude. And my father was leering at me. So that was another kind of sexualization thing that was happening that was very uncomfortable. So it was just these things that they did. It was just constant, the setups, and the handlers being trained to go in as well, and in mass places with having to get, maybe there was 20 different cabins there, at least, with people in them. So more and more training, more people to get under, more families.
Yeah.
And how to do it.
It's just incredible the way they're like taking control of whole place, like a whole house, a whole family, and then a whole town, and completely having control of, you know, all of the people, all of the families in that place. Wow.
And then other families too, like I was set out to be the babysitter for a while now, and one around 14 as well. My mother worked at a doctor's practice. That was her boss. Lovely gentleman that I met a couple of times, and my father suggested that I babysit them, and my mother's been given the message to set that up. So I'm set up to be the babysitter while him and his wife go out to a work meeting, leaving their newborn son, who was only maybe about 5 weeks old, with me as a 14-year-old. And I've arrived, my mother's driven me there. She's really apprehensive. I've noticed straight away. She did this thing, like she'd pull her sleeve in a nervous kind of way, clutch her throat for the voice, the speaking, very anxious. He's a very kind man, saying that his wife is busy putting the newborn down, that he's really good and really easy to put down. He's been no problem. I'll be fine. I can do that. He's under. This is all programmed for him to say to me. That she won't be long. She'll be out soon. My mother said to him, that my father's very worried, that I hadn't done too many babysitting jobs, and do you mind, but you might see him. He's just up the road sitting in his car. That he's got a request that the curtains be open in the lounge that I'm sitting at. So the curtains had to be open. So the doctors opened the curtains for me to be seen sitting on the lounge, and what they were watching, everything that I was doing. And one more request was that he leaves the front door key and the back door key by the front door. And he's looked at her like, and then he's gone, of course, because he's mesmerized. Next thing, he's gone and found the keys, and he's put them on a table. I could hear it going on a table by the front door. And then my mother's left. The wife has come out and she's chatted to me for a while, and then they've left. I haven't heard a sound from the baby, and I remember sitting straight and anxious on edge the whole way, just the whole time, just sitting like this, ramrod back, couldn't relax. I might have gone and got something that they'd given me to eat that was on the side, felt strange. And all of a sudden I could hear the slightest chink of the keys, just showing me that they can get keys. I already had the keys to the house. This is just for my benefit. And I thought, what's that? Don't go out there. Don't go out there. Don't go out there. That's programmed. Something's happening. And then it went without any other events. The father has driven me home afterwards. And then days or whatever after, it's a weekend or something, and my mum used to sometimes work early weekends on a Saturday morning. We've asked, why isn't she at work? And she said, oh, that her boss hasn't been into work for a few days, that they're having a terrible time with the newborn. He won't stop screaming. They think it's something with his ears, some problem with his ears, and that they're having a terrible time. They've had no sleep. The child won't stop screaming. Nothing will help. And it's been going on for days. Then another couple of days later, she's still not at work. It's still happening. So all these kind of things would happen.
Jeez. And knowing what they did with your ears, it's just heartbreaking to hear with a little baby like that.
Yeah, five weeks old. Yeah. And that there was no explanation. The doctor had no explanation, which they would have made a mockery. He's a doctor. He can't even have an explanation for his child. This is how they would talk around me. Mocking the doctor, mocking anyone that has a purpose in life, because they think life is to have no purpose unless you're or got their purpose, which I'll get to later. Yeah. So around this time also, I used to be allowed to have my hair cut how I thought I wanted it, but it was programmed. So it would be kind of going across my eye, a little bit like a shy eye, to have one eye. And I was allowed to go to a place aptly named Curl Up and Dye. So the hairdresser I was allowed to go to had that name.
Name is that for a hairdresser?
This is all programmed. So she was programmed a couple of years before to have that name. Everything's already set up. Every time I went to the hairdresser, one of my handlers would come in. Same one for many, many years and decades later. Black hair, white skin, tall, skinny guy, black suit back then, formal shoes, stick out like a sore thumb, but he'd be there, and the hairdresser to make sure I was doing it right, asking for the right haircut, and she was doing it right. He'd be gruff if she ever, asked him what he was doing. He'd say, I'm just waiting. And she'd say, well, I'm quite busy. Well, I'll just wait until you're not busy. And then she'd, because she was under, and I'd be thinking, oh no, she shouldn't be talking to him like that. She'll be punished. And then that thought would go. And then eventually she invited me to do a hair show set up in a nightclub. So this was to start getting me used to going to nightclubs. I'm only 14, which is quite young. And so I did this hair show in the nightclub. I'm being asked that I'm told that I don't need to put any makeup on because I've already got my makeup on. I've said, no, I don't have any makeup on. And she's like, really? Because my face looked so good, I didn't need any makeup. So that was said as well from what they were doing behind the scenes to my skin. And yeah, so I'm just basically taken to nightclubs by my mother to be set up to start going to nightclubs later on when I was lured there to get me to start. And a lot of the handlers would be there. They'd be drugging all the drinks that people were having in the club. They'd have control of the whole bar. A lot of the drinks already were pre-tampered with, so they were already drugged before they even poured them. So all this was starting to be shown to me.
It's all part of the conditioning, isn't it? All part of the conditioning for the beta programming and just being in those kind of environments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all done in increments. Yeah. My mum at this stage was starting to do a lot of cryptic crosswords. So I was programmed to see the way that the organisation does their kills in a lot of cryptic language that they use, choosing names or having people named with certain names that I'll come to later on, places, the combination of the name and the place might have a connotation, this kind of thing that they have done, that they have fun with, was starting to be shown to me around this age. So my mother was always doing a cryptic crossword if I was let out to see what she was doing, and she'd be doing this in the dining room.
Yeah.
And asking me to help her with them, these kind of things. And I would later be put with another man, 25 years older than me when I was about 16, who was a cryptic whiz as well, programmed. So this was like, yeah.
So many word spells, isn't it? It's like they use language just to have one up on, everyone, because they use different meanings for the words and they mean different things than the average person would recognize being put out there.
So yeah, like I still feel the ultimate betrayal by my mother, but it wasn't her fault. That was the only time that I thought we were connecting, and it was to take me to these set up arrangements. The only other time that I can remember being mesmerized to be really proud of her was when I was about 7 and brought back from a horrific event, and I would tremble a lot. And I remember at one point the teacher, the nun, was arranging to have, I guess, parent-teacher kind of get-togethers. And up till that point, my mum had been making this beautiful dessert thing called coconut ice, which was really yummy. It was like white and pink color, 2 layers. It was drugged. So she was bringing it in, and it was my job to make sure all the children tasted my mum's coconut ice. Not that I knew that it was drugged, but it would be my job to do that. And one bad thing that I was brought back from back then was I was taken to Australia, and they had a father programmed with a gun to point the gun at his family. And there was a girl who was about 12 then, I was about 7. And she would later, 40 odd years later, be brought back into my life 35 years later. So they would bring people, children that I had met, and adults and adolescents many, many years ago, decades ago, when I was a child, when I was an adolescent. They were always around my age or a bit older or even younger. And then they had such longevity that up till, even now, I still have some people around me that I know. I met them years ago, decades ago. And I'd hear these stories as well, and just have to just not say much at all, if anything at all, because it's too horrific. So this woman, she blamed her father, because they create these family rifts. That's why they call themselves a family, as a mockery. They will do things where they'll place the father in these situations with the children. He's forced to do it, or the children will be killed, or he'd go to jail if he doesn't do this, or it's just an acting thing to start with. And this is training for the handlers as well, because I can remember back then there was boys around my age there as well, by the older forefathers that were handling this. My father wasn't there from memory that I remember for that one. It was one of the others, a couple of the others. So these things would happen, and then that would be brought back into my life decades later. Meetings.
I hear that a lot.
These meetings were often done under organisations like a rape crisis place or a carer's disability place, where I'd meet these women mostly, who I'd met earlier on in my life, decades ago.
They really like to target these places like disability institutions, rape crisis centres, domestic violence centres, because there's so many vulnerable people. And good, I hear that this story so frequently with survivors is that handlers placed in their lives have come back from, you know, earlier abuse that they've remembered, earlier scenes that were set. So they already know each other. And then there's this kind of like already relationship there, even though it's only subconscious, and you're really drawn to this person without knowing why.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask you, you've talked a bit about the mesmerizing drugs. Do you know what sort of drugs they were using for the scenes? Did they mention that at all? Because it's so interesting how they kind of just...
It felt kind of like an MDMA, things like that, because later on in my life, they would bring me into having recreational drugs around people as well as a cover. So I would get to feel what they felt like, which was nothing like the drugs they get. Their drugs are off the scale. But yeah, it would feel like a truth serum, a MDMA, a relaxation drug where everything's lovely, people are lovely, you're mesmerized with somebody. You've also had programming with that person under scopolamine so that you recognize them in your alters. Some of your alters will recognize that person as theirs, will you? And you have that mesmerization feel.
Well, that would make sense with the MDMA, because we know that it's been used in MK Ultra projects as well, and it gives you, you know, you've got this feeling of like everything's good, so you start trusting this person. You're like, this relationship's great, etc., without realizing that it's all been set up.
And then they can also layer it so that you get that MDMA feeling, and then and you relax as someone's walking towards you. Like my father would often walk into the room and I would feel very relaxed, happy to see him, mesmerized. And then eventually there's other drugs in your system coming into action where you suddenly feel the horror wave. Oh my goodness, this is what he does, kind of thing as well. So just different staggered cocktails of drugs, some with accelerants that I've spoken about, some wheeling out, so there's not so much of that over time. So it's all timed, which is why they call themselves the Zodiac to start with, and now Ascension Masters. It's all about the meticulous timing amongst other connotations, many connotations. So another thing that happened that my mother was involved with, because this is what I'm mainly speaking about today, was I was lured by a friend. I'd been off school for a while, taken to different things, and brought back to school behind the curriculum. And one of my best friends at the time said that she had gone to the certain park to do her biology assignment and I should go there. So that's the message. Whenever someone told me to do something, I had to do it. That was my programming. So I've got on my bike, and instead of going home, I've gone to a different park further away from home. And I'm standing in the park with my clipboard doing my biology assignment after school. And I can see in the distance a white car pull up, and it's got my attention because under programming I'm told or had a run through already about what's going to happen. And I can see men getting out of the car and sort of pushing one man like he's a donkey and pointing in my direction. And I'm like, oh, here we go. And the man had a dog, and I've got shoved his dog out the back door, and the car doors have all slammed and off they've driven. And next thing, this man is doing like a long sort of U-turn around towards me. He's come up to me in the park and the trees, and I've already thought, oh, he's going to approach me. I do have ESP, all that kind of stuff. And he's asked me out on a date or to swap numbers, and I'm thinking, oh, I'll give him the wrong number, and then of course I don't, so I'll get into trouble. So I've given him my number, and I've got away from him. I've gone home thinking, what have I done? Like blaming myself. Why did I do that so easy? He was a much older man. And next thing, the phone's rang, and my father has answered the phone. The phone didn't didn't ring very often in our house. It would be my father having a quick phone call from somebody, or me. And he's said, Dave is on the phone to you. And I knew who that was by then. We'd swap names. And he's asked me to a university toga party. So he's about 24 years old.
Wow.
And I've gone, okay, well, I'll ask my mum and dad, thinking, yeah, of course, they're going to say no. Yay, I'll get out of it that way. And my father's looked at me and said, of course you can go. Like, what? And I'm like, okay, now I have to go. So I've got back on the phone, swap details. He's coming to pick me up. My mother's even lending a hand to get me ready. She knows how old he is. He's 24. He's taken me away to this toga party, which was a university that I would later go to. So this was all planning. They wanted me to get to know this university as well. I'd be there, enrolled in there by the age of 16, in order to split me from the family and take me to worldwide events and then hide me in brothels. That was the plan, which happened. So I've gone to this toga party, and of course all the handlers are there. One of them's in a black suit, paying me a lot of attention, pouring us a drink. I think I had some kind of toga on. Some of the other students are saying to this boy, oh, we're worried about you. Why are you bringing someone so young here? Because they're all in their early to mid-20s, and here's me, I'm 14. And next thing he's said, let's get out of here after the drink. He'd been given a signal, taken to his place, and after what happened, after what he did under control, he looked at me in shock, and my whole body was black and blue.
Oh,
and there was sexual assaults and everything. And he's just looked like, what have I done? Because he was under programming. And I've covered it all up at home, but something made me feel that, oh, my father knows about this, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Everything just seemed too easy or whatever. And then after that, he kept turning up, and my mother's encouraging me to go on dates with him when I didn't want to. She's even walking me out to his car to make sure I hop in the car, and he drives me off. And it's just the most ultimate betrayal. I remember feeling really angry at her for pushing me to go on these dates with much older men. After that, all of a sudden, one of my father's friends from school, a very handsome man named Bill, used to come around, and my mum would flirt with him, and she'd make references to me. So she'd always bring me into their little coffee dates, which were happening in the dining room, her domain room, basically, in the house. And she'd get me to make them coffees. She'd bring me into the conversation. And then she'd openly say things to me, either behind the scenes or even in front of him, that he really liked me, that he had a thing for me, all this kind of stuff. That he came here for me. He'd come in. I'd say, no, he comes to visit you, Mum. And she'd like, no, he comes to see you. And this is a 35-year-old man. So all these kind of things have been set up.
it would have been so horrific, just feeling that betrayal, feeling like you're being marketed by your mother as well. So sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I just began to realise that they were playing awful games, and that I was part of it, and I couldn't get out of it. One thing after another.
Yeah. And at this
And I was able to have, by then they were giving me some memories of these things that were happening, and letting them stay in my consciousness. So the split system that had been, now they're starting to blur the boundaries, and they're bringing me into more of an awake state from the age of 14, after so much especially when I was 12 and 13. They did a lot of work on me, so I was out of school a lot. Now they're bringing me more into the everyday.
Yeah, where you
world that they bring their murders into and everything. Yeah.
Wow.
So they're blurring the boundaries.
Yeah. So you've now got recollection of these things and these meetings and meetups being organized in your front altars, so you're actually completely conscious of them as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like conditioning, like you said, it's just constantly layered and built upon, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and year to year, in wherever place I was placed in, they would alternate my front altars, like they would make a new one. So my front altar was different, which doesn't happen often.
Yeah, what
Give me a whole different personality under programming for my front altars,
right?
which one they would bring in.
Do you feel
No
that
memory of others.
is that for different tasks, or like what is your
Different
thing?
places that I was placed in,
Yeah.
different tasks. Yeah.
And I guess that would also mean that your memories of like what had happened over previous years wouldn't be so prominent as well. You're in a completely new
Mm-hmm.
personality almost, addressing things that are coming up just as if it's happening now, rather than, you know, the programming that you went through 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 6 years ago.
They would completely switch it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Completely annihilate some and bring new stuff out.
Wow.
Yeah. Completely. And it would go with complete change of wardrobe, complete personality change. My entire face would look different. I'd have different likes and dislikes, different hobbies, some kind of little career that they would bring in. It was always a completely different person. Different friendship groups, completely different people around me,
Wow.
different food likes, everything, even different health from what they were doing. So yeah, so now I've begun to talk about the setup of the sex slave altars that would become more and more prominent in my everyday life, as I attempted to bring all this into the public, so that when I was made to disappear from my family, there was the cover that, oh, she was precocious. They had me connecting with older men. So eventually when I was 16, I was placed with a man 25 years older than me, who was a big-time criminal, that I'll get to later. He was part of the Mr. Asia syndicate, which was a worldwide drug syndicate back in the 70s.
Jeez.
So that's who they placed me with when I was 16, in and out of brothels, and then used him, and he spent most of his time in jail, and I'll get to that later. Highly trained in cryptic crosswords, all that kind of thing. They had let him escape from jail because they run right through the jails and they can get anyone in and out with a cover. So he had managed to make an escape, and he also got someone else to escape that was brought into my life as well, another horrible person. So yeah, but I'm still alive. Don't know how.
You're doing
And
amazing.
I'm waking up and getting out of bed.
Yeah, look at the healing that you've been able to just create within your life and within yourself. It's just such a testimony to your determination and your beautiful heart, Nellie, to be speaking out for so many that don't have the voice to do it and are still on that healing journey. So it's so inspiring to see what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot of things that can be said for spending time in nature. It's so peaceful. And if you're lucky enough to get a job like I do now, spending time in nature, teaching weaving workshops, that's a real blessing. And I've just got to move on from that with that. It's a good thing.
Absolutely. I think it's so important as survivors that, you know, we have hope. Like sometimes it's confronting and it's full on to be remembering so much and, you know, remembering these horrific traumas and the programming that we've went through, and just, you know, you almost go through a stage of grief, I feel, as well as you're integrating, just to realize how much we've missed out on as well with our childhoods and our earlier lives. But we all have the opportunity now to take back our lives, and you're such a beautiful example of that. You know, you're out there creating, you know, beautiful weaving workshops and healing yourself and healing others through speaking out. So we thank you so much for what you do to share, Nellie.
And I just wanted to encourage other survivors that haven't spoken out yet that there's no shame. they can speak out as much detail as they need to, as they're comfortable with. And it can feel quite shameful. I still battle that, but I think the more that we speak out about this, then other people can see and witness these horrendous structures that are set up for us from babies, from childhood, that we had no escape from, and the manipulation and how they do it in increments. And it's just so ordered that there's no shame, that we shouldn't feel the shame, but we do. But it's not our fault. And people need to hear these stories. And I know they're really awful to hear, but the more people that share survivors' stories, the better, and the more it's going to get out there for people to have these understandings of this. And maybe someone out there, some people out there can work out what to do, how to shut this down.
So true. It's time for the shame to go back onto the people that deserve it, and they're the perpetrators. So it's a brilliant point. And I hope that by us having these conversations publicly about the kinds of trauma and about what survivors go through to heal, you know, we can normalize being honest, we can normalize being true, and we can normalize just people healing and speaking the truth rather than these being taboo topics that are just hidden away, because that's so important for survivors to heal, is to have a voice out there in our communities, but also for all our children. Like these topics need to be known and out there so they're safer and more people are aware of what can be happening. So thank you.
There's so many signs for people to pick up. I'm trying to let people know how it can look to an older person looking at a child that has all these symptoms, and what these men look like and what they do, so that people can start recognizing this.
Definitely. The more eyes that we can have open to what these cults are up to, the more safety we have in our communities. So thank you so much for your efforts to speak out. We really appreciate you, and we'll be chatting again soon.
Thanks, Gabbi. Bye.